Today, we're looking at some really unconventional material perspectives that definitely challenge the usual narrative on global affairs.
Mm-hmm.
You know those questions you sometimes see online, the ones that make you think twice, maybe about big figures, big conflicts? Asking, well, what's really going on?
Exactly.
We got a stack of that kind of compelling, maybe even uncomfortable stuff today. And our job, as always, is to unpack it, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to understanding these challenging views.
Indeed. And what we're delving into offers a very, very distinct viewpoint. It really prompts you to think critically, to question assumptions about current events.
Okay, let's dive in. The sources start by analyzing Western strategies, and they use some pretty strong language, calling aid efforts a sham. There's also this mention of a 50-day timeline. Kind of mysterious.
Yeah, the 50 days thing is presented as a peculiar, not immediately obvious why that number, but the sham comment, that connects directly to arms deliveries.
How so?
Well, the material claims that, these big announcements about arms, they're not quite matching reality on the ground. It talks about Patriot missile batteries, for instance.
Right, the figure of 17 full complements was mentioned.
Exactly. And the claim here is that those 17 complements are just not flowing as stated. They give a specific example. Swiss-made Patriots ordered way back for delivery in 2026, maybe 2027.
Okay.
Apparently, those are being diverted to Germany first, and even then, there's no clear timeline for them reaching Ukraine.
So we're in 2025, and the deliveries mentioned are potentially years away.
That's the point the material makes. It suggests a big gap between the political messaging around aid and the actual immediate military impact. More about optics, perhaps.
And if military aid is presented that way, what about economic pressure? Sanctions? The sources seem pretty skeptical about their effectiveness, too, especially against big players.
Very skeptical. They argue that threatening sanctions on, say, China, India, Brazil, it's basically futile at this point.
Futile? How?
Well, they cite Brazil's stance, which is essentially, fine, if you don't want our trade, we won't trade with you. Very direct.
Okay.
Then there's China, which the analysis says is actually doubling down on Russia, and it brings up China's leverage, things like rare earth minerals, magnetic materials, vital for industries like, the auto sector, a subtle threat, perhaps.
And India.
India, according to this view, is on the fence. But if pushed too hard by the West, it could easily slide off the fence towards groups like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
So the takeaway here is that Western leverage, economically speaking, might be overestimated in this analysis.
That's precisely the argument. It suggests maybe fundamental miscalculation by Western powers about their actual influence in this shifting global landscape. The old playbook isn't working as it used to, according to this material.
Right, which brings us back to that 50 days thing. The sources offer a really provocative explanation for that timeline.
Yes. This is where it gets quite controversial. The claim is that the 50 days aren't about a military strategy, but about removing the current Ukrainian leadership.
Removing them? Wow. On what basis?
The material points to reporting, specifically citing journalist Seymour Hersh and also elements within the British press. The suggestion, apparently, is that the current leadership is on its way out.
And why would that be necessary, according to this viewpoint?
Well, the argument presented is that a change is needed to move the conflict forward, to have, quote, legitimate elections and find a leader who could actually negotiate a deal with Russia that Russia finds acceptable.
A deal or something else? You mentioned the material uses strong language.
That's a key point.
Yeah.
The sources are quite stark here. They don't talk about a negotiated settlement so much as, they use the word surrender. They suggest Ukraine is heading towards surrender.
Okay, that's a major claim. And it connects to another really controversial point in the material about the Ukrainian leader himself, right?
It does. The sources put forward this extremely challenging narrative that he wasn't democratically chosen in the way usually understood, but was effectively a, quote, hand-picked puppet.
A puppet of whom?
Of intelligence agencies, specifically MI6 from the UK, the CIA, and also Ukrainian oligarchs. That's the assertion in the material.
And his job, in this view, was what?
His job, according to this analysis, was to enable Ukraine to act as a proxy in a conflict designed ultimately to engage and weaken Russia.
So the goal was to strategically defeat Russia using Ukraine as the vehicle.
Exactly. That's the strategic aim described in these sources. But they argue it's failed. It hasn't strategically defeated Russia. Instead, from this perspective, it's led to Russia becoming more dominant, stronger even.
The Russian bear analogy comes up here, doesn't it?
It does. The imagery used is vivid. The bear is out of hibernation. It's strong. It's on the prowl. And the quote is something like, nobody's going to be able to put it back in its den.
So let's pivot to that perceived strength. How do these sources assess the actual military capabilities? Russia versus NATO. It sounds like they present a surprising picture.
Very surprising and stark. They paint Russia as militarily quite formidable right now. That bear analogy isn't just talk. They point to the military-industrial complex supposedly working like clockwork.
Any specifics?
Yes, quite a few. Drone production, for example. They claim over 1,000 Shahed-style drones are being made daily in Tatarstan, with plans to ramp up to 2,000 a day.
1,000 a day, that's huge.
It is. And the comparison made is striking. Russia supposedly produces more drones in 3 months than the entirety of NATO produces in a year. That's the claim.
Wow. And the cost.
Another major point. The Russian drones are estimated at maybe $20,000 each. Western equivalents, like one called Lucas, are projected at $1 to $1.5 million per copy.
A massive cost difference.
Huge. And beyond equipment, the sources stress that Russian troops are now, after 3 years of intense fighting, extremely battle-hardened and, quote, very good at killing.
Okay, so that's the picture of Russia. But what about NATO? How does the material portray NATO's readiness or capabilities? It sounds like it's not flattering.
Not at all. It's actually quite blunt. The British Army, for example, is described as a paper army.
The paper army, meaning?
Meaning the numbers aren't what they seem. They cite a figure of 74,000 personnel across all UK armed forces, but then say this includes, hairdressers, clerks, medical staff, diversity officers, and suggest that maybe only 40,000 of those are actually deployable for combat operations. Furthermore, the analysis flatly states that NATO as a whole has no relevant combat experience on this scale.
So when you hear generals from NATO countries, the sources mention British, Polish, French making strong statements, how does this material frame that?
It frames it as, well, ludicrous, ignorant, and frankly, dangerous, given the alleged reality of their capabilities versus Russia's described strength. This bellicose posturing is seen as completely disconnected from reality.
Which leads to their conclusion about a potential direct conflict.
Yes. The argument is crystal clear. Any direct clash between Russian forces, as they are now, and current NATO forces would be an absolute disaster for NATO.
So this reinforces their point that Russia is actually posturing for peace from a position of strength.
That's the interpretation presented, that Russia feels strong enough that it doesn't need war with NATO and is actually seeking a resolution, despite how it might be portrayed elsewhere.
All right, let's shift gears to another deeply controversial area these sources tackle. The whole Russia narrative that dominated politics for years.
Right. This is perhaps one of the most incendiary claims in the material.
What's the core assertion?
The core assertion is that the entire narrative was, quote, a hoax. And significantly, they claim it wasn't perpetrated by the U.S. intelligence community, who, this analysis states, actually concluded the opposite, but by a former U.S. president and his administration, his henchmen and women.
A hoax orchestrated from the top. That's a huge allegation.
It is. It's described as a fraud or even a coup against American democracy, something exponentially bigger than other events often discussed in that context.
But why haven't there been prosecutions if the claim is that serious? The material addresses that.
It does. It suggests prosecution would be very difficult. Reasons cited include lots of classified information, issues of executive privilege, and even the potential existence of double agents within intelligence agencies whose exposure could cause, well, major diplomatic and security problems.
Okay. And the sources don't just point fingers domestically in the U.S. They single out the U.K. for a specific and damning role.
Yes, this is another really striking part of the analysis. It claims the UK, specifically MI6, was, quote, up to their necks in it.
In the hoax.
In facilitating what the material describes as active treason against a sitting U.S. president. The language used is incredibly strong.
Treason. That's
extremely. The view presented goes so far as to suggest the UK government, because of these alleged actions, is now effectively an enemy of the United States and even, quote, an enemy of all of humanity.
Wow.
It calls the UK government a shame to its own heritage, the heritage of the Magna Carta, of democratic principles. You can feel the sense of betrayal in the writing, especially given the historically close U.S.-UK relationship mentioned.
That really is a profound set of claims. We've certainly journeyed through some deeply challenging, uncomfortable perspectives today, material that really pushes back against a lot of commonly accepted ideas about power, about war, about politics.
Absolutely. It forces you to confront viewpoints that exist far outside the mainstream narrative, whether you agree with them or not.
So maybe a final thought for our listeners to chew on.
Perhaps consider this. How do these kinds of alternative, sometimes jarring viewpoints change how you understand global alliances? How do they make you think about the forces that might really be shaping events? What does it mean for all of us when the narratives we rely on are contested so fiercely?
That's definitely something to reflect on. The world is incredibly complex, and staying informed means looking at it from multiple angles, even the challenging ones. To continue exploring these kinds of complex geopolitical issues and get deeper analysis, we definitely encourage you to subscribe to Geopolitics Gazette.